thanks so much for having me. And, you know, we're in a moment of incredible opportunity to win progressive changes that, undermine white supremacy and that benefit workers, immigrants, Black people, Latinx people, and Indigenous people. And the coronavirus pandemic and these uprisings all across the country in response to the murder of George Floyd and the ongoing racism in America are completely upending what is politically possible. And so you should throw out what you thought were winnable or reasonable campaigns. It's time to dream big and to unleash your imagination for what kind of world we can all create together. Donors, foundations, and nonprofits have an incredibly important role to play in all of this. No doubt there is a great need to fund services to minimize suffering in this challenging time. And many donors have stepped up in that way, and that is terrific. And there is also an urgent need to invest in movements for social justice. Funding movements is perhaps the single smartest choice donors and foundations can make if they care about saving American democracy. And, you know, funding movements is a smart choice, first and foremost, because movements are always essential for large-scale social change. Slavery wouldn't have been abolished in this country without the abolitionist movement. Women would never have secured the right to vote without the suffrage movement. And LGBTQ equality wouldn't exist to the extent that it does without a movement. And it's clear that the movement influenced that fantastic Supreme Court decision yesterday, too. Movements are effective and necessary because they help to break political and policy logjams. They circumvent the usual rules of politics by changing what is possible. And the best policy ideas don't win unless there are movements driving the change. I bet every single person on this webinar today can think of a great policy that they personally wanted to see become a reality, but it failed. The right policies don't always win. It takes power to make change, and funding movements helps communities build power. The vulnerability of workers has been shown so very starkly by the coronavirus pandemic. Millions losing their jobs and their health care. Workers without proper PPE. The pandemic has pulled back the veil on how horribly workers fare in the American version of capitalism as it stands today. And that pulling back of the veil creates opportunities for movement work to build worker power. And the uprisings for racial justice are creating a new sense of what is possible. Look at how Minneapolis is completely rethinking community safety and the policing system in this moment. The second reason why funding movements is a smart choice is because movements help donors leverage their limited dollars. Even with the huge sums of money that some foundations and wealthy donors have, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the scope of the challenges our society is facing. And so to make a difference, we have to think about leverage. Research NCRP conducted a few years ago shows a huge return on investment for funding of community organizing and movement work. We documented $115 in benefits for families and communities for every $1 that funders invested in that kind of work. The third reason why funding movements is a smart choice for donors is because there are lasting benefits from investing in the capacity of movement organizations. The people who cut their teeth in the civil rights movement have played key roles in so many ways for decades after the height of that movement. Think about Congressman John Lewis and all he has done for our nation. And the key politicians in Minnesota responding so well to the current uprisings are all former community organizers. Attorney General Keith Ellison, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter, Minneapolis City Council members Steve Fletcher and Andrea Jenkins. they all used to be community organizers. Their work was funded by donors and foundations and membership dues from everyday people. And those leaders developed skills during their years as organizers that have helped them be effective as elected officials. I'm working on a piece about this, and it should be out later this summer. So those are the three reasons that smart donors invest in movements. Movements are almost always necessary and essential for large-scale change. Movements help donors leverage their limited dollars. And third, there are lasting benefits from investing in the capacity of movement organizations. So if the smart foundations and the smart donors are backing movements, why are the movement groups struggling financially most of the time? Well, because most foundations and wealthy donors aren't actually that smart, at least not if you judge them by where they put their money. We did an analysis recently and found that philanthropy invested more in leisure sports like golf and cycling than they did in the pro-immigrant movement. That's pretty sad. We've got to turn it around if we want to save our democracy. So, NCRP has resources for funders who want to start investing in movement work, and we have resources for nonprofits who do movement work who want to raise more money. Can you guys put up the first slide for me now? So these are our two big projects that can be helpful for people who want to get into this more. The first is our movement investment project. Has all kinds of resources for both movement groups who want to raise more money for their work from philanthropy, and also for philanthropies who want to figure out how they can start funding movement work. We've been pretty focused for the last year on the pro-immigrant, pro-refugee movement, and later this year we'll be adding work on gender justice and worker justice as well. The most recent thing out is a state-by-state analysis of how much are the big funders in every state investing in immigrants. So it helps hopefully create a new conversation between the donors, the big funders in that state, and the pro-immigrant groups in that state. And then our Power Moves toolkit, it's a self-assessment tool for foundations, helps you understand how well you're building power, sharing power, and wielding power in pursuit of equity and justice. It can be really useful for funders who see what's going on in the world and want to get better at this stuff. Can we go to the next slide? We have lots of foundation members, but we also have a nonprofit membership program. And most of our nonprofit members are relatively small, and they're committed to the fight for social justice. And we have a lot of resources that we use to help our nonprofit members figure out how to raise more money and understand philanthropy better. So encourage anyone who works for a nonprofit to check out our membership program and consider being a part of that community. And then the final slide, please. These are all the different ways that you can connect with us, our website, follow us on Twitter, connect on Facebook, LinkedIn, or subscribe to our electronic newsletters. Our democracy is under siege right now, and movements are how we can save it. And I hope everyone on this call is doing everything they can to take advantage of what I see as real opportunities for change in the next 3 to 18 months. Thanks. I look forward to the conversation now.
Thanks, Aaron, for all the work you're doing in both keeping philanthropy accountable and keeping organizations working in collaborative action with philanthropy. So the first, and I also asked for our audience to please ask questions to Aaron. We have him for the next 8 minutes, so I want to make sure that we are directing the most efficient questions to you. But Aaron, I'll kick us off with, if I was part of an organization, Sarah Foundation, and I wanted that organization to take more of a stance around anti-racism and take a stronger stance around racial justice, how do I even begin? What are some of the steps to do if I worked at the foundation right now?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I'm assume this is like someone who is not the CEO. I mean, if you're the CEO, then make it happen. But if you're not the CEO, I think that step one is to figure out, have some quiet one-on-one conversations with others in your organization that you think might also share this vision. And together you can strategize about how best to move your institution forward. Um, Often there are members of the senior leadership team who are going to be more predisposed to wanting to be part of something. And I would say don't sell people short. The last few months have really shaken up how people see themselves in the world. And if, 6 months ago, you could never have envisioned the CEO of your organization wanting to take action in a meaningful way, I think it might be different now. I've seen people starting to show up in ways that I never thought they would do. And that's very heartening. But you got to be strategic about how you're going to make change in your institutions. And you start by gathering those around you who share your vision.
And related to that, I know you mentioned around policy and that this is a moment to actually catalyze some political and new laws that can really benefit the cause. What are some like advocacy or policy stands that foundations can legally do in this time? And if they can, how can they support other grantees to advance those messaging?
Sure. Private foundations can do way more than people think they can. Um, if the line is here for what's legally allowable, most foundations don't get anywhere close to the line. They stay, way too far away from it. So the best resource is from our colleagues at the Alliance for Justice and their Boulder Advocacy Initiative, and lots of clear guidance there for what private foundations can do and can't do. But one of the most important things in a time like this is wielding their power in a community to stand up for people who are being attacked, to say very clearly, we side with immigrants in our community, and it's outrageous that they've been left out of all of the coronavirus responses from Congress, and our local government should do something. And to say we are outraged by the murders of unarmed Black people by our police force, and our foundation stands with you in the fight to change that. And then you got to back up those words with actions and dollars.
Which is, thanks, Aaron. The question that I want to build on, which came up in the conversation I had earlier with Swami, is that even in this relationship, there is both fear of loss, right? And then there's also, if you're a grantee and there's that trust, what are some of the guidance would you provide to grantees in keeping funders accountable during this time? That it's less about a statement or a plaster on your website, but that you need to back those actions. What are some of those things, tools that you can provide and that you've seen that has worked?
Yeah, I think it's like ongoing conversations with your funders about what you need. And, we've seen some pretty creative responses from Philanthropy in recent days. And I am hopeful that that leads to other foundations also stepping up. I'm talking, of course, about the big announcement from Ford, MacArthur, Mellon, Doris Duke, and one other that escapes me right now, that they are really dramatically increasing their spending at this time. That's something we called for from the field back in March, and some small funders have done it, and this was the first group of large funders to really do it. The bond financing that they came up with was a creative way for a foundation that seeks to exist in perpetuity to still get more money out the door right now and not damage those chances at perpetuity. So I think it's about, being really clear about the urgent needs and opportunities that your organization faces, and encouraging them to dig as deep as they can and do more.
Aaron, we have a question around with the arts angle. Do you see arts playing a role currently in this movement? And what are some ways we can support the arts in making change in local communities?
Yeah, arts arts organizations are so important all the time for our communities and for their thriving, and especially in movement moments like this. The creativity coming out of the protests has been fantastic. Um, some arts funders really do a good job of weaving together um, arts, culture, and social change. I think the Bonefields Stanton Foundation in Denver, they're pretty small, but they do this. They do this pretty well, and there are others that are doing that. We did a report on fusing art, culture, and social change a number of years ago that I think a lot of arts funders have found helpful as they try to do this. But it's essential to for arts funders to move beyond the sort of traditional Western European canon of arts organizations and to fund community-driven arts work, and especially art being done by communities of color. Too few arts funders have made that leap, and when they do, they are always happy that they have expanded their understanding of who's worthy of funding in their community.
And I know we only have 1 minute, but I think I'll sneak in one more question. Erin, what would you provide as guidance for program officers that want to pitch the shift or pitch that movement is critical at this time to leadership? Like, what are some of the tight ropes that they need to work in that process?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, donor collaboratives are sometimes a safer way for a foundation to be part of movement funding rather than funding the organizations directly. And there are tons of collaboratives that folks can take up right now. There's a great Black-led movement funding collaborative run by Borealis Philanthropy. So that's perhaps an easier way to pitch moving money to movements right now. If you want to support immigrants, the For Freedoms Fund or a local pro-immigrant funding collaborative that GSER staffs, the grant makers concerned with immigrants and refugees, staffs in many states are a great way to do it as well. And again, those conversations with the leadership, like, hey, this is a moment. I'm a program officer. I think we should do something. I want to do more. How do you feel about it? And really encouraging their leaders to take risks, because both the need and the opportunity right now is so great.